This lesson will introduce understanding the need for upset prevention and recovery training, UPRT, the location of governing documentation, and what should be expected from UPRT. This lesson will also provide information on the reasons for implementation of UPRT procedures to mitigate loss of control in-flight events, or as one definition puts it, a deviation from the intended flight path. In addition, this lesson and subsequent lessons for UPRT is meant for airline flight crew training, not all licenses across FAA, EASA, or ICAO controlling agencies. The following objectives will be covered during this lesson. Identify the reasoning for the UPRT requirement. Locate the sources of regulatory guidance on UPRT. Explain the expectations and goals of UPRT. Since the beginning of this millennium, aircraft upset or loss of control in flight, LOCI, has been identified among the major risk factors which lead to fatal accidents in commercial air transport operations, and the prevention of these events has become a strategic priority at a global level. A recurring causal factor in LOCI incidents is inappropriate reaction by the flight crew to impending stalls or full stalls. Evidence exists to show some pilots fail to avoid conditions which may lead to stalls, or fail to recognize the insidious nature of an impending stall during routine operations in both manual and automatic flight. Evidence also exists showing that some pilots may not have the required skills or training to respond appropriately to an unexpected stall. Shown above are some of the resources available for more in-depth study of UPRT. These documents present regulatory and advisory information with a significant degree of commonality amongst the information they provide. Take a moment to examine the table shown above. This UPRT lesson will be provided by a relatively new methodology called Evidence-Based Training, EBT. The development of EBT arose from an industry-wide consensus that in order to reduce aircraft hull loss and fatal accident rates, a strategic review of recurrent and type rating training for airline pilots was necessary. The existing airline pilot training requirements in national regulations are largely based on the evidence of hull losses from earlier generation aircraft and rely on a view that to mitigate risk, simply repeating an event in a training program was sufficient. Over time, many new events have occurred, and the subsequent addition of these events to the training requirements saturated recurrent training programs and created an inventory or tick box approach to training. The aim is to develop and evaluate the identified competencies required to operate safely, effectively, and efficiently in a commercial air transport environment, while addressing the most relevant threats according to evidence collected from accidents, incidents, flight operations, and training. The IATA Operational Safety Audit, IOSA program, directs operators to ensure that flight crew members complete UPRT during initial ground training and subsequently during recurrent training, either once every 36 months or in accordance with a continuing qualification schedule as defined in the operator's AQP, ATQP, EBT, which conforms to the specifications if applicable. All IATA member airlines are IOSA registered and must remain registered to maintain IATA membership. The FAA UPRT is structured primarily by two aviation circulars, ACs. AC 120-109A directs UPRT training, testing, and checking pilots to ensure appropriate responses to impending and full stalls are utilized. The core principles of this AC include that the single most important action for a pilot to take to recover from an impending or full stall is to reduce the angle of attack, AOA. Training should emphasize that impending stall and full stall recovery techniques are identical. Evaluation for recovery from impending and full stalls should exclude a predetermined altitude loss value. Altitude loss is not considered unless ground contact is possible. After mastering the stall recovery procedure by maneuver-based training, stall prevention training will present realistic scenarios which could be encountered in operational conditions. The goal of AC 120-111 is to provide recommended practices and guidance for academic and flight simulation training device, FSTD training, for pilots to prevent developing upset conditions and ensure correct recovery responses to upsets are utilized. The core principles for this include enhanced instructor training on the limitations of simulation, comprehensive academic training on aerodynamics for pilots at all career levels, early recognition of deviation from intended flight paths. The prevention of upsets is enhanced by improving pilots' manual handling skills. Crew Resource Management, CRM, is integrated into training, including progressive intervention strategies for monitoring pilots. The FAA directs that UPRT will not be evaluated in proficiency checks, line-oriented evaluation, LOE, or by other jeopardy events. UPRT methodology should train to proficiency, and the key to effective UPRT is the instructor. The scenarios the instructor must manage can be very challenging in many simulators. Be advised, the extended envelope training, which is required by FAR 121-423, is covered in AC 120-111. Startle and surprise may also factor into LOCI events, and training will also cover these conditions. IATA has their regulations that guide the training for licenses, airline flight crew training, etc. That the sample above is just one of the many written guidances from the controlling agency. Even relatively minor differences in aircraft design and production generate different aerodynamic effects. Therefore, flight envelopes and characteristics will be different, especially when approaching the limits of controlled flight. Approved procedures presented by international aviation organizations will be presented in this lesson, and the operator airline will incorporate approved original equipment manufacturer, OEM recommendations into training as well. ICAO, Airbus, ATR, Boeing, Bombardier, and Embraer have collaborated to produce the Airplane Upset Prevention and Recovery Training Aid, UPRT. The current edition is available at the internet address shown above. Make a note of the address for future reference. It is also available as an app for phones and iPads. While instructors are key to effective UPRT, the importance of simulator quality and capability cannot be overstated. FAR Part 60 requires that all FSTDs being used for UPRT maneuvers must be Level C or higher and specifically evaluated and qualified for such maneuvers. As of March 12, 2019, any FSTD being used to conduct UPRT must have been qualified as described in Part 60 FSTD Directive 2. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency, EASA, also has a significant requirement regarding the use of simulators for full stall. EASA mandates that although full stall recovery can be trained and practiced in most flight and other training devices, it must be checked in a full flight simulator only. Training will be conducted on the ground in an FSTD and in a classroom with UPRT qualified instructor, or in front of any computer with a UPRT qualified instructor available for phone-in questions. The elements or main topics of the course include aerodynamics, causes of and contributing factors to upsets, a safety review of accidents and incidents relating to aircraft upsets, G-load awareness and management, energy management, flight path management, recognition, system malfunctions, and finally manual handling skills, which are simulator-only training. Extended envelope training will include manually controlled slow flight, low speed, high speed differences, manually controlled loss of reliable airspeed, upset recovery maneuvers, bounced landings, and stall recovery. The FAA defines a startle as an uncontrollable automatic muscle reflex, raised heart rate and blood pressure, etc., elicited by exposure to a sudden, intense event that violates the pilot's expectations. EASA defines a startle to mean the initial, short-term, involuntary physiological and cognitive reactions to an unexpected event that commence the normal human stress response. The FAA defines surprise as an unexpected event that violates the pilot's expectations and can affect the mental processes used to respond to the event. Similarly, EASA defines surprise as the emotionally based recognition of a difference in what was expected and what is actual. After learning and practicing the stall recovery procedure in a simulator, instructors will attempt to use flight deck workload, ergonomics or noise, ATC, and other distractions to set up for UPRT scenario-based training. Scenario-based training, SBT, is defined as training which incorporates maneuvers into real-world experiences to cultivate practical flying skills in an operational environment. The goal of SBT is to develop perception and decision-making skills relating to upset prevention, recognition, and recovery, while providing the pilots with an opportunity to use the skills learned in maneuver-based training in a realistic scenario. SBT requires realistic scenarios, often taken from ASAP, FOQA, and ASRS reports. Normally, trainees will not receive a briefing on UPRT scenarios and should expect the unexpected. From a timing standpoint, SBT will normally occur during the latter stages of initial, transition, or upgrade training, as well as any time during recurrent training. Although UPRT is serious business and is certainly challenging, remember it is for training to proficiency. There are many new elements to perform during non-threatening simulator sessions. Of course, steep turns and stalls are still part of proficiency checks, but these have been shown before. In summary, this lesson identified the reasoning behind UPRT requirements for aviation. The sources of regulatory guidance and references from appropriate agencies regarding UPRT were also shown. The expectations and goals of training for pilots and instructors were also explained.